The green light. Skipping to the introduction, a short biography of this extensive experience and CV. Mr. Shahid Najam comes originally from Pakistan and studied political science, law, rural development, and public policy at the London School of Economics. In 1974, he started his career with the government of Pakistan as a civil servant and has been with the UN system since 1992. His major expertise and experience has been in the field of public policy, strategy formulation, disaster management, relief operations, and rehabilitation. He served in various capacities within the United Nations, and his contributions include, among other, development of agribusiness model, program for poverty elevation, income generation, and urban and rural development. He also designed and implemented the new decentralized governance system in Pakistan. Shahid Najam assumed his office at the as the resident coordinator, resident representative of United Nations Development Program in Ankara on December 24th, 2009. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much for this introduction. I have a bad throat, so I have brought with me a support system. In case during the course of my lecture my throat fails, then he'll start, so you will have to excuse me for that. It's indeed an enormous pleasure for me to be a part of this platform, of this gathering, and I call you the supporters of peace and the lovers of peace. And what more one could aspire in days of turbulence and turmoil, be in the company of those who propagate and profess love peace. I wish to first of all thank the Institute for Cultural Diplomacy for having invited me to participate in this conference on peace building and conflict resolution. As I said, it's indeed a great honor and privilege to share this platform with a very esteemed group of experts and supporters of peace and be a part of the global effort of ICD to promote peace and stability in the world, which, ill luck would have it, continues to witness and experience a spate of terrorism, blatant violation of human rights, and widespread incidents of conflicts. If human rights and development are two pillars of the United Nations work, peace is the third. For those of us who are more fortunate, peace is like a melody and song, which enriches the souls, and at the same time, and it's very important, enables them to exercise and expand their choices freely. And for those who are not, it's a distant dream they cherish and aspire to realize. An assiduous struggle to emancipate themselves from the afflictions of death and disease, revenge and recrimination, and disempowerment and deprivation. It provides solace to those who consider it as a donation to needy people thousands of kilometers away from them, provides inspiration to those who proudly display it as a symbol on their T-shirts, and provides hope for a better future for the posterity in the lands where humanity joins hands to fight against tyranny and oppression. For the United Nations, peace is a full-time job. It is protecting civilians, overseeing elections, disarming ex-combatants, saving child soldiers from warlords, contributing to post-recovery conflict, and more importantly, using wide array of diplomacy to prevent war. Since 1945, the UN has assisted in negotiations for over 180 peace settlements that have ended regional conflicts. And the UN, with its peacekeeping, peacemaking, and peace-building mechanisms, is going to places where others cannot or will not go, doing others cannot or will not do. We know that in the world of today, with the range of complexities associated with a large number of disputes and conflicts, peace, like war, must be waged and waged with earnestness and perseverance. And the UN in many parts of the world is actively engaged in waging peace at various levels and in various forms and manifestations. Ladies and gentlemen, preventive diplomacy is one of the key tools the United Nations use to triumph peace globally. Preventing the conflict before it turns into crisis is critical. We know that failure to prevent conflict is extremely costly, and innocent civilians suffer the most. Figures also testify to this awful truth. An estimated 90% of the global conflict-related deaths since 1990 have been civilians, and 80% of these have been women and children. Economic consequences of conflicts are also severe. The World Bank has calculated that the average cost of conflict is equivalent to more than 30 years of gross domestic product growth for a medium-sized developing country. Such is the quantum, the size, and the scale of the devastation and the loss, the economic loss, which is caused to the humanity. Preventive diplomacy has been an enduring idea at the United Nations for many decades. Since former Secretary General Dag Hammarskjöld first articulated the concept over half a century ago, it has continued to evolve in response to new challenges. An integral part of broader conflict prevention effort, preventive diplomacy refers specifically to diplomatic action taken at the earliest possible stage to prevent potential disputes from arising between parties, to prevent existing disputes from escalating into conflicts, and to limit the spread of the latter when they occur. Preventive diplomacy remains highly relevant along the entire conflict continuum and spectrum. Recently, thanks to the efforts of the Secretary General Ban Ki-moon and with the support of member states, the United Nations preventive diplomacy machinery has been improved and expanded. Member states indeed place greater emphasis on conflict prevention and visualize a proactive and key role of the United Nations in these efforts. There are several reasons for this renewed interest. Foremost is the recurring and devastating impact of armed conflicts on individuals, societies, and economies. Moreover, although quiet successes rarely make the news, a number of recent engagements have reconfirmed that through a combination of diagnostic analysis, early warning, rapid response, and partnership, the international community can help to diffuse tensions in escalating crises and assist parties in resolving disputes peacefully. Prevention does not mean looking the other way in times of crisis, vainly hoping that things will get better. It has been done too often. Nor it can be just a brief pause while the so-called enforcement measures are being prepared. Prevention means proactive, decisive, and early action to stop violence before it begins. For the purpose, the United Nations, as part of its preventive diplomacy machinery, has created the responsibility to protect concept. Recently, we marked the first decade in the life of the responsibility to protect concept. Since 2010, history has taken a turn which is of concern for all of us. Preventive diplomacy efforts were tested as never before. The results have been uneven, but at the end of the day, tens of thousands of lives were saved. The United Nations gave hope to people long oppressed in Libya, Cote d'Ivoire, South Sudan, Yemen, and Syria. By its words and actions, the UN demonstrated that human protection is a defining purpose of the organization in the 21st century. Today, we witness the effectiveness of the tool of preventive diplomacy, such as the good offices of the Secretary General, envoys, regional offices, political missions, group of friends, and fact-finding missions. Of course, the Security Council, the General Assembly, the Peace Building Commission, peacekeeping operation, and the UN country teams continue to be the important elements and segments of the preventive diplomacy machinery. As many of these elements have been mobilized, we have also learned some important lessons. For one, political will is of tremendous significance. If the parties do not want peace or are unwilling to compromise, it is extraordinarily difficult to persuade or impose it from the outside. The second, we need to recognize that internationally led preventive diplomacy efforts might serve only to avert violence in the short term. Ultimately, only national mechanisms and institutions can prevent violent conflict in the long run on sustainable basis. Thirdly, the international community does not have the option of looking the other way in times of crisis. It happened in Bosnia, it happened in Rwanda. World cannot afford additional black pages in its history. Fourthly, we have learned that UN cannot stand on the sidelines when challenged to take preventive action. In line with this belief, the UN has stood firmly for democracy in Cote d'Ivoire. It fervently used diplomacy to ensure a peaceful referendum in Sudan, a democratic transition in Guinea, and an end to the violence in Kenya and Kyrgyzstan. From Afghanistan to Middle East, from West Africa to Sudan and Somalia, UN missions are engaged every day, helping to sustain complex political peacekeeping and peace-building processes. I am portraying a very rosy picture, and I can see it writ large on your face. However, we still have a lot to achieve. Violent conflict continues to inflict a shocking and intolerable toll on individuals, societies, and economies. Every day we can see the costs of failing to prevent conflict. But this should not deter us from trying to resolve underlying tensions. And when conflict does erupt, to stop its spread and mitigate the damage it can cause. Recently, the Secretary General outlined the steps that have been taken to strengthen preventive diplomacy to avoid conflict before they turn into full-fledged crisis. First of all, preventive diplomacy must be prioritized. Early action is an essential part of it. Too often, the international community finds itself clamoring to manage crises that could have been prevented from spiraling out of control in the first place. It is incumbent on all regional organizations and the United Nations to act early and decisively. Secondly, while prevention is significantly cheaper than a cure and is one of the smartest, most cost-effective investment the international community can make, it still needs sufficient investments to deliver results. Thirdly, the UN will work to further strengthen its strategic partnership with regional and sub-regional organizations. In crisis situations, the international community must be able to decide quickly on who can do what to help. Sometimes preventive diplomacy is getting the international community to speak with one voice. Finally, the international community must continue to support national institutions and mechanisms for mediation, facilitation, and dialogue, and to assist the national entities at their request in building national systems for conflict prevention. Inclusion of civil society organization in preventive efforts is absolutely essential and sine qua non, especially women and youth who can lead the charge for the peaceful change. It must be recognized, however, that each situation is unique, and ultimately it is for the people to be able to determine their future. There is no one-size-fits-all formula, and the UN is developing solutions unique to every situation to catalyze and act as an agent of change. Those of us who are spared the most negative effects of disaster, poverty, or instability cannot turn a blind eye on the less fortunate. The cascading effects of abuse and indifference can eventually engulf all humanity. We in the UN firmly believe that better preventive diplomacy is not an option. It is indeed a necessity. Let us join forces to fully make our world a better place for all. Thank you very much indeed.
Something wrong with my mic. Thank you for that, in your words, rosy speech, Mr. Najam. Let's see if we have some challenges to the rosy picture from the audience. Any questions or comments? Yes, the gentleman in the third row.
Thank you, Mr. Shahid. I was expecting, honestly, that you will be talking about building sustainable institutions, not so much doing PR for the UN, but unfortunately, all I was hearing was the rosy picture, as you said. My own experience is that in the conflicts that I know, the UN terribly failed. They were given the opportunity to resolve these conflicts, but they didn't live up to their expectations. And I will give you an example. In Somalia, the main sponsor of the Somali conflict was the UN and the facilitator. And the UN never bothered to set parameters of who should be involved in this conflict. In the year 2000, Somalia had an excellent bottom-up approach to peace building, where those who were known to violate rights were excluded. Unfortunately, the emergent government was not acceptable to some powers, and the process failed. 2009, the UN was given an opportunity to facilitate the so-called Djibouti peace process, and there are no parameters. Unfortunately, the former warlords, those who are known to violate rights, were admitted into the peace process, and they emerged as winners. They took huge portfolios. Sudan, you gave the example of Sudan. The CPA was not a product of the United Nations, as you would like us to believe. It was an initiative of the major powers and supported by the African Union. But then after the emergence of the new Republic of Southern Sudan, what happened? There is more conflict between the two Sudans. There is internal conflict in Southern Sudan. The UN has peacekeeping forces in Southern Sudan. UNMISS, they are just bystanders, and they are not doing much. Thank you very much. Sorry to be very...
I like it. Thank you. Thank you very much for this, and I was expecting this firepower. As for the discourse of my speech, I had made it absolutely clear to the organizers that I will be speaking on the preventive diplomacy. If you wanted me to speak on the sustainable institutions, I would have spoken on the sustainable institutions. Because I believe it's not only let me reflect a little bit and then I'll come to your question. It's not only the sustainability of the institutions. If we are talking about the intergenerational and intragenerational equality and of a world for our children and their children, which is more just and which at least give them the right to enjoy what the planet Earth is offering to the present generation, that you have to go beyond building the sustainable institutions. You have to look at the policies and the processes also. In my view, any approach which solely confines itself to the institutional building without tackling the policy and the process issues through people-centered, inclusive manner is not going to work. I mean, I'm making a very sweeping and a very solid, a very strong statement, but that is what I believe, and a student of development for the last about 35 years, that is what I have witnessed it. In Africa, Tanzania, where I covered Africa for 10 years, I'm working in. So in my view, that if you are talking, then I would have loved to speak to you on the institution building and institution strengthening as an important recipe, part of the recipe to be able to address the massivity of the problem of hunger, poverty, malnutrition, deprivation, disempowerment, alienation that we are facing. And then it could also be related to changing the world economic and political order, which may look very ambitious at this point in time, but which is very much possible, especially with the emergence of the institution in the South, with the initiation of the flow of knowledge, technology, experience, good practices, lessons learned, east to east and south to south. No more it's one-way traffic, north to south. In any case, apologies I still offer you if you came to listen to the lecture on sustainable institutions, but I had made it very clearly known that I will speak on the preventive diplomacy. Because I thought that this was a more provocative subject. And I'm very happy that I have been able to provoke you into challenging. Thank you very much. There are a couple of, am I taking too much of time?
No, please
No,
finish.
go ahead,
I thought you were
Yes,
finished. I was
I'd
going
like
to give
to
it
say
to
that I
microphone,
will be
please.
very brief. You know, I am cognizant, that's why I said that, you know, I'm portraying a rosy picture. One needs to understand that there is a power structure and there is a functional dynamics within which, and the context within which UN operates. And I know that this is a kind of hackneyed and a very obsolete argument, but it for us is a reality, a very bitter and acrimonious reality, who are working with the UN system and very proudly working for the UN system. But then the reality is that it is the structure, the decision space, the operational procedure of the UN system, which structurally prevent it in taking forward some of the issues. In my view, the fact that United Nations has already provided you a platform to exchange views, to interact, and to contribute has served 50% of the purpose, not 100% of the purpose. Now, coming specifically to your question, when I said that United Nations work with the regional organizations, with the national governments, with the bilaterals, with the power structure, with a view to ensuring that the preventive diplomacy which it embarks on is successful. You know, most of the decisions which have a political implications are taken by the Security Council. And I don't have to dilate upon the way the Security Council operates. United Nations is reflecting the decision taken by the member states as per the rules and procedures agreed by the international, all the governments, through a consensus. Now, where we have encountered the failures is not because of the lack of will or lack of good faith. It is because of the lack of the decision structures and enforcement mechanism, which have not been there and which cannot be there. And that is why, you know, people are talking about reforming the organization, reforming the Security Council. So when I talked about Sudan, when I talked about Côte d'Ivoire, when I talked about Kyrgyzstan, there was definitely a very important role which was played by the United Nations with a view to ensuring that the conflict is resolved or prevented, or that there is a peaceful, that you could control the damage to the extent possible.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Najam, for your speech. Actually, this rosy picture you draw is the picture that drives a lot of young people to the United Nations. And once you're inside, you just realize that sustainable institutions are maybe one of the biggest paradoxical terms you can use, because institutions are all, at the end of the day, all about human beings. And please correct me if I'm wrong or if I'm totally leading to a wrong direction, but I feel like the UN is possible to operate as an international agency as good as the human capital within the country is. So if the human capital within the country has a certain pattern to work in terms of work ethics, work pattern and work traditions, and the approach to things to tackle conflicts, the approach to accompany processes, will be exactly determine the effect and the efficiency of what UN is possible to do in that country. Because I feel like each UN country office sort of like reflects what is not going well within that country, why development work is still needed. So I think this is one of the biggest disillusions I had. So it's all of you. At the end of the day, it's your decision. If every job for itself has its own beer to carry for sure, but this is one big frustration since everybody is expecting this big expectations about the UN. No, but I mean, at the end of the day, it's all about the locals within that country. I mean,
would you like to respond, or should we take a few others?
Comment. Sometimes I agree with it and sometimes I don't agree. I agree when you contextualize it, but if you are working for an ideal world, then you don't agree. You know, if you contextualize it to a specific situation, yes, it's what the collective expression of the human capital, which ultimately. But then, if you are thinking and if you are envisaging a world and if you want to bring about a change, then you have to have a vision. And that vision is here, the reality is here. And there comes the issue of the leadership. Do we have the kind of leadership that would pull the reality up? And that is the human capital, the social capital, all the capitals that you have. And you have to sort of bring up that capital without compromising on the vision. So, in general terms, when we talk about human capital, social capital, natural resource capital, and the financial capital, I mean, this is a reality in a specific situation. But then there are men, and there are a group of men and women who have been able to articulate a vision, release that tension, transform that tension into a positive energy, and then channelize that positive energies unleashed by the human capital to achieve the reality, the vision, and then they bring it up.
Thank you. Let's continue. 2 more brief comments or questions.
I just believe that building sustainable institution to avoid future conflict is good, but it's not enough in the real world, because speech are often too far from actions. And from my personal experience, and this year in particular, is that every party, every people, religion, ethnic group wants to give its own truth, its own interpretation, its own historical fact. And so this is, I think, very dangerous, because every time there is this kind of speech, you try to convince the audience that this is the truth. And I'm speaking about this because this year I'm the president of Coexistence Study Society, because I do believe in promoted dialogue and interaction between different group and religions group, ethnical group. So I tried to be involved in different sides. And our target is to create 2 sides on the same table in each kind of talk. It's not just talk, sometimes it's art, it is interdisciplinary. But I was not expecting that it was so hard. This year has been incredibly hard. And personally, I always go to different group of seminar or conference to listen to what is the message. And I have been in the last 2 seminar. I've been to the commemoration of genocide. I don't want to name now which are the people in question, but the audience was basically the people that they had the genocide, and the angriness was really, really high. I was the only one that was not part of this group. So it seems to me to go inside of clan. And we're speaking about university level, when actually we should promote something different. And I agree to commemorate the genocide, but I don't agree that politics is so much involved. And I think we really need to start from there, from the university, from the new generation, from daily life, because it's very, very difficult and harsh at this point. Before speaking about big institutions, the reality, if you dig a little bit, it's horrible, really.
Mr. Najam, I'm Professor Alper Zardan from the Coventry University. Thank you very much for your talk. I don't want this session to turn into a UN bashing session, which often the case whenever a UN speaker is on the platform. But I think the issue is that what we see is in the international community, in many places when we talk about preventive diplomacy, we tend to fail. And I think that's what you pointed out. We even failed in the case of Kenya, where the UN is present, physically in a big way. So in a way, there are so many cases that, it seems that the UN or the international community in general tends to fail in preventing conflicts. So the question is really, what to do about this. So in the sense what you were saying earlier in terms of responsibility to protect, I totally agree with you that rather than talking about intervention, we should talk about how to prevent. This is very much part of R2P. But in that way, your remark was very interesting. UN is on an organization and we do what our member states ask us to do, right? Now, probably as a UN representative, you are not able to comment on this freely, but let's assume that we use Chatham House rules here. There's a talk of reform of the UN, United Nations, so sustainable institution. what would be your ideal UN system in terms of its Security Council, for example, which is often the kind of the sticking point? Can you describe that kind of organization which you think can be effective in conflict prevention? Thank you.
What an enlightening session. I'm really enjoying. First, just a comment, and I agree with you. But let me share with you the approach that we have adopted in Turkey. I have so far visited about 18 universities. There are 81 provinces, and there are about more than 300 universities. Those who belong to Turkey, they would know better. Essentially, the idea is that because we are talking about building consensus, building a world where tolerance, coexistence are taken as real solid principle, that they are not the ideals, they become an operating part of our culture. And that you can do through involving the youth. Absolutely, because when we talk about the intergenerational equity or the responsibility to bequeath a better world for the posterity to come, you need to engage the youth and the young people in that. And essentially that is why we talk and we go to the universities and talk to them on issues of governance, on issues of human development, on issues of poverty, of education, of health, of alienation, of inclusiveness, governance. These are the issues that we deal with. Essentially, to sensitize them that there is a responsibility which they would owe to the generations which are going to follow. And when you engage them in a dialogue, whether they belong to one ethnic group or a religious group or a culture or system of ideas and beliefs, when the human beings start interacting, I strongly believe that what differentiates us as Homo sapiens from the animal kingdom is the reason and rationality. Reason and rationality, compassion, and good nature of human being does find expression and prevail. So I agree with you. Interfaith, interdisciplinary, this dialogue, this consultation, this inclusiveness is absolutely essential, and that is what we are doing here in a small manner in our own areas of operation that we have in the UN system. To your question, I wish the answer could have been there. And the collective wisdom of the humanity has been wrestling with this issue for decades and decades and decades. I, for one, if I have to, I'll do away with the Security Council. I will do away with and this is my point of view, which I very freely express myself. I think that gone are the days of giving differential and treatment to the people. The wisdom and sovereignty, the right, you talk about the right-based approach. And what is a right-based approach? It is not the charity that you are dishing out to the people. It has three dimensions. One, that you respect the right. And how many of us respect the right? And the two, it's the responsibility of the individual, the society, the nation, and the wider community to protect the right. And third is to create environment so the people should be able to exercise their right. So these three dimensions. And if you put these three dimensions in the context of the UN system, I mean, there will be an outcry for a reform, and definitely there is, as I said, that the differential treatment, no. I think we should be able to do away with this differential system of giving people more rights than the others. How a few people can determine the destiny of the entire world. And but again, somebody said it's a very bitter and a cruel world that we have to live with. The challenge which I think all of us has is that how earnestly we as individual and as collectivities join our heads and hands together in a responsible manner to work for a better world. Whether we will ever be able to have that kind of a, you must have, I mean, you are all enlightened people, the professor in the university. When I was a student, London School of Economics was pursuing public policy. There was a theory of justice of Raoul. You must have read that. I wish that we could have that kind of a scenario where everybody enters into the world on equal footing and then takes a conscious decision as to what course humanity has to take in order to ensure the wider social distributive justice for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's great to see that doing the work that you do, you haven't lost your idealism, which is inspiring, I think, and thank you for a very nice speech, and thank you to the audience for a very stimulating discussion.